He thought humiliating her would be easy, but he had no idea he was about to lose control of the entire room. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and quiet strength, stay with this story, because what happened next changed everyone who witnessed it. The glass doors of the exclusive downtown fitness club slid open with a soft mechanical hum, letting in a woman most people wouldn't look at twice, Naomi. Carter stepped inside wearing a simple gray hoodie, worn sneakers, and her hair tied neatly in a bun. Nothing about her appearance matched the polished marble floors, the chrome equipment, or the members dressed in tailored athletic wear that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Conversation slowed, just slightly, subtle glances exchanged, the kind that didn't need words to communicate judgment. And across the room, Victoria Langford noticed immediately, standing near the private training area in a crisp ivory blazer, her posture sharp, her presence commanding, the kind of woman who controlled rooms without raising her voice. She watched Naomi the way someone watches a mistake unfold, lips tightening into a thin smile as she stepped forward, heels clicking against the marble like a metronome of authority. "Excuse me," she said, loud enough for nearby members to hear. "This area is reserved for premium clients." Her tone carried no warmth, only polished dismissal. A few people nearby chuckled quietly. Others pretended not to stare. Naomi paused, her hand still resting on the strap of her bag, her expression calm, unreadable, as if none of it touched her. "I'm aware," she replied softly, her voice steady, but Victoria tilted her head slightly, amused. "Then you should also be aware that not everyone here belongs." The words landed heavier now, sharper, the room tightening around them. A hush creeping in as more eyes turned toward the unfolding scene. Naomi didn't respond immediately, and that silence stretched just long enough to make people uncomfortable, because there was something about the way she stood there, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, that didn't match the role they had already assigned to her. Victoria took another step closer, lowering her voice but not her intensity. "We have standards here," she continued, and for a brief moment, something flickered behind Naomi's eyes, not anger, not fear, but something far more controlled, something patient, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment all along. And that was when the atmosphere shifted. So subtly most people couldn't name it, but everyone felt it, like the calm before something irreversible. Victoria expected hesitation, maybe embarrassment, maybe even a quiet apology, because that was how moments like this usually ended. But Naomi did not move, did not shrink, did not look away. She simply stood there with her hand resting lightly on the strap of her worn bag. And for a brief second, something old flickered behind her eyes, not fear, but memory. The kind that comes from standing in rooms where people had already decided who you were before you ever spoke. Rooms where her voice had been overlooked, where her presence had been questioned, where leaving quietly had once felt easier than staying. And for just a heartbeat, that familiar pull returned, the instinct to step back, to avoid the attention, to disappear before the situation escalated. But it passed just as quickly as it came, replaced by something steadier, something earned. Naomi took a slow breath and stepped forward instead, her sneakers barely making a sound against the polished floor, and that single step shifted more than anyone realized, because it was not just movement, it was decision, the quiet refusal to retreat this time. Conversations around them faded into a low murmur. A trainer paused mid-instruction. A woman near the juice bar lowered her phone slightly, sensing something beneath the surface of the exchange. Victoria let out a soft, incredulous laugh, the kind people use when they believe they are still in control. "I do not think you understand," she said, crossing her arms, her tone sliding from polite dismissal into something colder, sharper. "This is a private facility, and we maintain a certain level of clientele." Her eyes lingered on Naomi's shoes again, reinforcing what she did not need to say out loud. A few nearby members chuckled quietly. Others watched with the detached curiosity of people who did not expect the outcome to change. Naomi lifted her gaze slowly, meeting Victoria's directly now, and this time there was no hesitation in it, no uncertainty, just a calm, grounded presence that did not match the role they had assigned to her. "I understand perfectly," she replied, her voice even, but there was something different beneath it now, something quieter and stronger at the same time. Victoria tilted her head, amused, but the expression did not hold as easily as before. Then you should also understand that not everyone belongs here, she said, her voice dropping lower, more deliberate. And that was when the room began to tighten, not loudly, not suddenly, but in a way that made people aware of every word. Naomi did not respond right away, and in that silence, the weight of her choice settled fully into place, because this time, she was not leaving. The words lingered in the air longer than anyone expected, heavy, deliberate, impossible to ignore, and for the first time Victoria did not respond immediately, not because she chose silence, but because she had lost control of the rhythm, the invisible script she relied on in moments like this. A subtle shift passed through the room. People were no longer watching out of casual curiosity, they were listening, trying to understand what they had missed, because somehow the quiet woman they had dismissed minutes ago now held the attention of every person within 20 feet. Victoria straightened her posture, forcing a small, controlled smile back onto her face, the kind that suggested authority even when it had begun to crack. I am not interested in whatever point you think you are making, she said, her voice carefully measured now, but the sharp edge remained. This is a professional environment, and I will not have it disrupted. Yet even as she spoke, there was something off. Something slightly strained beneath the polished tone. Naomi did not interrupt, did not challenge her directly. She simply tilted her head a fraction, as if studying something most people could not see. And that subtle reaction unsettled more than any argument could have. A trainer nearby shifted his weight, his arms lowering slowly from a crossed position. Another member who had been smirking earlier now looked down, suddenly unsure, because the dynamic had changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Naomi took a slow breath, her movements steady, controlled, and when she spoke again, her voice carried with quiet clarity. You built this place on appearances, she said, not accusing, not emotional, just stating it as if it were a fact written somewhere everyone could read. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of irritation surfacing again. We built this place on standards, she corrected quickly, but Naomi's gaze did not waver. Standards are supposed to measure value, she replied, calm as ever, not disguise insecurity. And that was when it happened, not an explosion, not a raised voice, but a shift so sharp it cut through the room. A few people exchanged glances, the kind that said something had just crossed a line no one expected to be crossed. Victoria's composure faltered for just a second, barely visible, but enough, because people noticed. They always notice when power hesitates, and Naomi saw it too, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with quiet recognition, like someone who had seen this moment before and knew exactly what came next. She reached down and picked up a small access card from her bag, turning it between her fingers, her eyes never leaving Victoria, and for reasons no one could explain yet. The simple motion made the entire room feel even smaller. The card caught the light as it turned slowly between Naomi's fingers, a small, ordinary object that suddenly felt like it carried weight far beyond its size. And the room reacted before anyone understood why. A subtle tightening, a quiet shift as attention locked onto that single detail. Victoria's eyes followed the motion instinctively, her expression sharpening as if trying to decode something she could not yet name. What exactly do you think that proves? She asked, her tone controlled but no longer effortless, because now there was uncertainty beneath it, faint, but undeniable. Naomi did not answer right away. She simply looked at the card for a brief moment, then back at Victoria, her gaze steady, composed, almost patient, as if she were giving the other woman time to catch up. The silence stretched, and in that silence the balance of the room continued to tilt. A man near the front desk leaned toward another and whispered something under his breath. A trainer who had been watching from across the floor took a step closer, not to intervene, but because something about this moment demanded witness. Naomi finally moved, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a small step toward the private access gate beside the premium training area. The same gate Victoria had used earlier without hesitation, and that simple choice made several people straighten where they stood, because now there was direction, intention, and whatever was coming next would not be accidental. Victoria's posture stiffened, her authority pushing forward again in response. "That area is restricted," she said quickly, the words landing faster than before, sharper, as if she needed to re-establish control before it slipped further. Naomi paused beside the scanner, holding the card just inches away from it, and for a fraction of a second, she glanced back, not at the crowd, not at the room, but directly at Victoria, and there was something in that look, something quiet and certain, that made Victoria's next breath catch ever so slightly, because in that moment, she realized she might have misread everything from the beginning. The room went completely still, no laughter, no whispers, just the soft hum of machines in the background. Naomi lifted the card, slow, deliberate, and hovered it near the scanner, not rushing, not hesitating, just allowing the moment to unfold. And as the seconds stretched, the question was no longer whether she belonged there, but how badly everyone else had misunderstood her from the start. The card hovered just inches from the scanner, and in that suspended moment, time seemed to stretch thin across the entire room. Every eye fixed on Naomi's hand, every breath held just a second longer than normal. Victoria opened her mouth as if to stop her, but the words did not come fast enough, because something deeper had already begun to shift, something she could no longer control with tone or posture alone. Naomi did not look at the scanner. She did not rush. She simply let the silence settle completely before closing the final inch. And then it happened. A soft, unmistakable tone cut through the stillness, clean and clear, followed by the quiet click of the gate unlocking. The sound echoed far louder than it should have, not because of volume, but because of what it meant. For a second no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the entire room needed time to process what they had just witnessed. Victoria's expression froze, not dramatically, not exaggerated, just a subtle, almost imperceptible stillness, the kind that reveals everything by trying to hide it. Naomi stepped forward without hesitation, passing through the gate as if she had done it 100 times before, her movements calm, natural, unforced, and that alone shattered whatever narrative had been built around her minutes earlier. A man near the entrance lowered his phone completely now, no longer pretending to scroll. Another member shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Victoria as if waiting for her to correct what could no longer be corrected. But Victoria did not move. She remained where she stood, her authority no longer expanding, no longer commanding, but tightening inward as realization began to settle in. Naomi stopped just a few steps inside the restricted area, then turned back, not abruptly, not confrontationally, but with a quiet certainty that demanded attention without asking for it. Her eyes met Victoria's again, and this time there was no misunderstanding left between them, no room for assumption, only truth laid bare in a silence that said more than any argument could. And when Naomi finally spoke, her voice remained soft, controlled, but carried across the room with undeniable clarity. "Access is not about how you look," she said, her gaze steady. "It is about what you have earned." And in that moment, the room did not just fall silent. It shifted completely, because the power that once belonged to judgment had just been replaced by something far more difficult to challenge. And for the first time since she walked in, Naomi Carter was not being watched as an outsider. She was being seen for exactly who she was. For a moment, no one spoke, not because they chose silence, but because the truth had already spoken louder than anything they could say. Victoria's posture remained upright, but something within it had shifted, a subtle collapse beneath the surface, the kind that happens when certainty is replaced by doubt. Her eyes lingered on the gate, then on Naomi, as if trying to reconcile two completely different versions of the same person, the one she had dismissed minutes ago and the one now standing inside a space she herself had just claimed was out of reach. A man near the front desk cleared his throat softly, breaking the tension just enough to remind everyone they were still part of the moment. But no one stepped forward, no one laughed now. The room that had once echoed with quiet judgment now held only the weight of realization. Naomi did not rush to fill the silence. She simply turned back toward the equipment area, her movements calm, intentional, as if none of this had been unexpected, as if she had already lived this moment in her mind long before it happened. She reached for a set of training straps, adjusting them with practiced ease, her hands steady, precise, and that detail did not go unnoticed because it spoke of familiarity, of experience, of a level of comfort that could not be faked. Victoria finally took a step forward, her heels softer now against the marble, less commanding, more cautious. "If there has been a misunderstanding," she began, her voice carefully measured, searching for footing that was no longer there. Naomi paused, glancing over her shoulder, not interrupting, not dismissing, just listening. And that alone shifted the balance even further, because now it was Victoria who needed to explain. "This facility maintains protocols," she continued, though the words lacked their earlier confidence. "And we expect members to present themselves accordingly." But even as she spoke, the statement sounded thinner, weaker, as if it had already lost its meaning in the presence of what had just occurred. Naomi held her gaze for a moment, then returned her attention to the equipment, her voice calm when she replied. "Protocols are meant to protect integrity," she said, adjusting the strap with a small, precise movement, "not to justify assumptions." The words were not sharp, not aggressive, but they landed with a quiet finality that left no room for argument. And once again, the room fell still, not out of tension this time, but out of understanding, because something fundamental had shifted, not just in how Naomi was seen, but in how everyone now saw themselves. And in that silence, Victoria Langford stood face to face with a reality she had not prepared for, one where authority alone was no longer enough. Victoria stood there a second longer than she intended, her mind working quickly to regain the control that had slipped so quietly from her grasp. But the room was no longer responding to her the same way. The invisible hierarchy she relied on had been disrupted, and everyone could feel it. Naomi adjusted the straps with a level of precision that spoke louder than any introduction ever could, her movements efficient, practiced, not for show, not to prove anything, but because she knew exactly what she was doing, and that certainty began to reshape the energy around her. A trainer who had been observing from a distance finally stepped closer, his posture no longer guarded but curious. "Do you need assistance?" he asked, his tone respectful, a stark contrast to what had filled the room just minutes before. Naomi glanced at him briefly, offering a small nod. "I am good," she replied, her voice steady. And he stepped back without question, because something about her presence made it clear she did not need validation. Victoria noticed the shift immediately, the way attention had realigned, the way people who once followed her lead were now watching someone else. And that realization pressed heavier than any direct confrontation could have. She took another step forward, her voice softer now, almost careful. "We value professionalism here," she said, attempting to reframe the moment. But even she could hear how different it sounded, how much it lacked the authority it once carried. Naomi paused again, her hands resting lightly on the equipment, then turned just enough to face her, not fully, not confrontationally, but enough to acknowledge her presence. "Professionalism is shown in actions," she said calmly, "not assumptions." And that sentence settled into the room with a quiet weight that no one could ignore. A few members exchanged glances, subtle nods passing between them as understanding began to take root, because they had witnessed the entire exchange. They had seen where it started and where it had led, and there was no denying the difference. Victoria's expression tightened slightly, not in anger, but in something closer to realization, the kind that arrives too late to prevent what is already unfolded. She looked around briefly, taking in the faces that no longer mirrored her confidence, and in that moment, it became clear that this was no longer just about one interaction. It was about the perception she had built, the assumptions she had enforced, and how quickly they had unraveled in the presence of someone who refused to fit into them. Naomi turned back to her training, her focus returning to the task at hand, as if the outcome had never been in question, and the room, once filled with quiet judgment, now carried something entirely different, a respect that had not been demanded, but earned in the simplest, most undeniable way, through composure, clarity, and truth. And as Victoria stood there, searching for something to say that would restore what had been lost, she realized that silence had already answered for her. The rhythm of the room had changed completely, not in noise but in weight. Every movement now carried meaning. Every glance held a quiet awareness that something irreversible had already happened. Naomi moved with steady control, adjusting the straps, and stepping into position with the ease of someone who had done this countless times, her posture aligned, her breathing measured, and when she began her routine, it was not dramatic, not exaggerated, but precise in a way that immediately commanded attention, each motion smooth, efficient, deliberate, the kind of execution that does not ask for approval because it does not need it. A few people leaned in slightly, watching closer now, not out of curiosity but out of recognition, because skill has a way of revealing itself without introduction. The trainer who had spoken earlier folded his arms again, this time not in skepticism, but in respect, quietly observing the control in her form, the consistency in her pacing, the confidence in her transitions. Victoria remained still near the gate, her eyes fixed on Naomi, but no longer with judgment. Now there was something else there, something harder to hide. The realization that she had misread the situation entirely, that she had spoken from assumption instead of understanding, and the consequences of that were now unfolding in front of everyone. A woman near the lounge area whispered something to her friend, and this time it was not a comment of amusement but of admiration, subtle but clear, because the narrative had flipped completely and without resistance. Naomi finished her sequence and stepped back, not seeking acknowledgement, not looking around for reaction, just returning to stillness as naturally as she had moved. And in that stillness, the room responded in its own way, not with applause, not with noise, but with a collective shift in posture, in attention, in respect, because what they had witnessed was not just ability. It was composure under pressure, dignity under scrutiny, and that carries a weight that no title or appearance can replicate. Victoria finally moved again, but this time her steps were slower, more deliberate, as if each one required thought. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer sharp, no longer edged with superiority, but quieter, almost careful. "I was not aware of your membership," she said, the words chosen with precision, but even then, they fell short of what needed to be said. Naomi turned slightly, meeting her gaze one more time, and in that look there was no hostility, no triumph, just clarity. "That was never the issue," she replied calmly, and the simplicity of that statement landed deeper than anything else had, because it exposed the truth without decoration, and in that moment, the room did not just understand what had happened, it understood why. The words settled into the room with a quiet finality that no one could escape, not because they were loud, but because they were undeniable. Victoria held Naomi's gaze for a moment longer, as if searching for something to push back with, something to restore the balance she had lost. But there was nothing left to challenge, because the truth had already taken its place, not through force, not through argument, but through presence alone. Naomi turned back toward the training area, her focus returning fully to her routine, as if the moment had already passed for her, as if she had never come there to prove anything at all. And that was what lingered most, the realization that she had not changed her behavior to earn respect. She had simply revealed what was already there. A few members slowly returned to their own activities, but their movements were different now, quieter, more thoughtful. Conversations resumed in low tones, but the earlier edge of judgment was gone, replaced by something closer to reflection. The trainer who had observed her earlier gave a small nod of acknowledgement as he passed by, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect, and Naomi acknowledged it with the slightest glance. Nothing more, nothing less. Victoria remained where she stood, the polished confidence she once carried now tempered by something deeper, something harder to define. Her posture no longer commanded the room, because the room had already shifted beyond her reach. She took a slow breath, her expression softening just enough to reveal the weight of what she had understood, not all at once, but enough to recognize that authority without awareness is fragile, and that respect cannot be enforced through appearance alone. Naomi finished adjusting the last piece of equipment and paused for a brief moment, standing still beneath the bright overhead lights, her reflection faintly visible in the mirrored wall ahead, composed, steady, unchanged, and that was the quiet truth of it all. She had walked into the room as herself and remained exactly that. It was everyone else who had been forced to reconsider. And as the moment dissolved into the rhythm of the day, there was no announcement, no dramatic resolution,